Part 2. She loved him unconditionally for 6 years, unaware he was in love with another. It was 2:47 in the morning when the screen lit up. Zara Mitchell was alone in her Soho studio, 3rd floor, surrounded by the smell of cedar pencils, fresh linen, and the ghost of oil paint that never quite washed out of the floorboards. She was wearing a paint-stained cashmere sweater that had belonged to her father, Marcus, the jazz musician who had taught her that love is not a declaration but a daily practice. The sweater was too large, the cuffs frayed, and it was the only thing in that room that had seen her cry. Everything else in the studio had been rebuilt with her own 2 hands after walking away from a Manhattan penthouse where every surface had been purchased by someone else, curated for someone else, and lit for someone else's idea of power. The laptop chimed. Not a client email, not a friend checking in after midnight. The subject line read, Mitchell and Company Ethics Complaint, Urgent Review Required. Zara did not panic. Panic is a luxury for people who still believe the world is fair. She had stopped believing that 6 years ago, around the same time she learned that love, when poured unconditionally into the wrong vessel, simply evaporates without even the courtesy of a sound. She clicked. Inside was a folder of doctored photographs, time-stamped, fabricated, surgically edited, images designed to look like invoices for kickbacks from a vendor she had never used. A typed narrative accused her of accepting bribes, of leveraging her ex-husband's connections for professional gain, of building her reputation on the scaffolding of a marriage she had supposedly exploited before discarding. And at the bottom of the email, a single sentence that did not belong to a legal team. It belonged to someone who knew her well enough to know exactly where to cut. A reminder that leaving quietly does not mean the past stays quiet. A threat dressed as observation, informing her that she should have stayed invisible, that she had been safer that way. Zara sat back. She did not reach for wine. She did not call a friend to rage. She looked at the screen with the same expression she had worn the Sunday morning 4 years earlier when she read the text message on her husband's phone while he showered. The face of a woman who has already decided, quietly and completely, that she will survive whatever comes next. She was reaching for her phone to call her attorney when 3 slow knocks came at the studio door. At 2:52 a.m., nobody arrives with good intentions. Zara walked across the room. She did not grab a weapon. She grabbed her keys. Because Zara Mitchell had learned that the most dangerous thing a woman can carry is her own certainty. She opened the door. Kim Juan stood in the hallway. No entourage. No driver idling downstairs in a black town car. No coat thick enough for February. Just a man in a black turtleneck and a worn leather folio under his arm, breathing hard like he had run 6 blocks through the cold. He looked at her. Not the way he used to look at her across auction rooms and candlelit dinner tables in the early years of their marriage. Not the way a billionaire looks at an asset he has not yet decided to keep. The way a man looks when he knows the fire is not coming for him this time. It is coming for someone he has already failed once. And he is not sure if showing up empty-handed is braver or more pathetic. He told her that inside the folio was everything Seo Yeon had done. Every meeting with executives from Hanung Tech, the Korean competitor that had been trying to break into KM Global's American market. Every wire transfer, every shell company, the names of journalists paid to plant stories about her 6 months prior. He had proof of the corporate espionage, the financial fraud, the systematic dismantling of the life he had failed to protect. He told her he would not use any of it until she decided how the story ended. He would not fight this battle in her name unless she gave him permission to pick up the weapon. And right there, in that threshold, with the warm studio behind her and the cold hallway between them, Zara had to confront something harder than divorce papers. She had to decide whether the man who once failed to see her, who had stood in her light and called it his own, could be trusted to help save what he had never helped build. To understand why that leather folio felt heavier in her hands than the divorce papers ever did, We have to go back. Not to the river, not to the pier in Brooklyn where they stood in silence, shoulders almost touching, neither stepping away. We have to go back to the Monday after that Saturday. When the water had settled, the sun had set, and the real examination began. The Monday after the Brooklyn Bridge, Zara woke in her Brooklyn Heights apartment at 6:15 a.m. Light came through the east-facing window in a way she had not experienced in 6 years of marriage. In the penthouse, the windows faced south and west, curated for sunsets and city power, for the golden hour of wealth and spectacle. This light was different. It was modest, honest. It did not perform. It simply arrived, day after day, without asking her to be grateful for it. She made her coffee in a mug she had bought at a flea market in Atlanta with her mother when she was 19. She sat at her small kitchen table, and she made a list, not a list of feelings. Zara had stopped making lists of feelings the morning she walked out of that freezer with 14 labeled containers behind her. This was a list of boundaries, hard lines drawn in ink. Kim Jwan could call. She would answer when she chose. He could write. She would read when she was ready, but her apartment was hers alone. The restaurants of their old life were dead rooms now, museums of a marriage that had functioned perfectly while quietly suffocating its architect. And under no circumstances, not for any amount of money or apology, would Mitchell and Company accept a contract from KM Global or any of its 47 subsidiaries. She wrote it down. She looked at it. And then she went to work, opening her studio at 8, reviewing layouts for a Harlem townhouse that would weave West African and Korean heritage into a single conversation between walls. What Zara did not know that Monday morning was that Kim had made his own list. He had sat in his office at KM Global, the same office where he had once placed both hands flat on her 3-inch binder and wept. And he had written 3 rules in a leather notebook he had not used since business school. The first rule was to not perform. The second was to not buy her. The third was to show up empty, or not show up at all. He did not send flowers. He did not send a car. He did not have an assistant draft a note on heavy stationery. He sent a text of 9 words, inviting her to a small cafe in Fort Greene on Thursday at 7, with no expectation attached. Thursday came. Fort Greene Cafe. A small room with exposed brick and coffee that tasted like honesty and burnt toast. He arrived first. A table in the corner, 2 cups on the table, 1 black. One prepared exactly as she had once described to a hotel concierge in Seoul years earlier, during the months they had lived there, while he expanded the company. Oat milk, 2 drops of honey, no sugar. Because she believed sugar ruined the roast. Zara noticed the cup before she noticed him. In 6 years of marriage, Kim Jwan had never once ordered her coffee correctly. Not once. She'd always adjusted it herself without complaint, the way she had adjusted everything in that marriage. The temperature of rooms where investors gathered, the emotional climate of dinners where she translated not just language, but intention, the architecture of a life that kept him comfortable while she slowly disappeared inside it. But this time, he had remembered. He had written it down. He had listened. He told her about his board, about deals he had stepped away from because the developers reminded him of the man whose $350 million contract she had saved overnight 6 years ago, the night she rebuilt the proposal while he slept, the night he took the credit and called himself visionary. He admitted he had fired his head of security, the man who had cleared Seo Yeon without finding the rot underneath her polished surface. And then he stopped. He looked at his hands. He told her he was not saying these things for forgiveness. He needed to say them to someone who knew the real cost of his failure, the only person who had ever known the math, the only person who had ever looked at the numbers and seen the human being behind them. Zara drank the coffee. It was perfect. And for the first time since the October art auction in Manhattan, where they had met, she considered that he might not be managing her. He might simply be present. But she gave him nothing. Not a smile of approval. not a softened gaze. Not yet. Zara Mitchell did not award passing grades for effort alone. She had learned that lesson in the 14 months she spent emptying her closet meal by meal, label by label, boundary by boundary. 3 weeks later, the board of KM Global voted unanimously to hire Mitchell and Company for the redesign of their new American headquarters, a contract worth millions. They sent the request directly to her business email, assuming the gravitational pull of the billionaire's orbit would naturally reel her back in. They addressed her as Mrs. Kim in the opening line. Zara replied with a single sentence, informing them that Mitchell and Company was not for sale to their orbit. She forwarded the exchange to Kim and told him to handle it. He did. He walked into the boardroom the next morning and personally killed the contract. He told the directors that a refusal from Mitchell and Company was sacred. He warned them that if they ever contacted her again without her explicit consent, if they ever used her married name in a business context again, he would dissolve the board and replace them himself. It cost him 2 allies. One of them went to the press. The headline the following Tuesday was small but sharp, questioning his stability, suggesting the billionaire was unraveling over a divorce. His partner David called Zara that evening and asked if she knew what the refusal had cost him. She replied that she knew exactly what accepting it would have cost her. And David, the man who had once watched Zara remember every investor's child, every coffee order, every spouse's job before she walked into a room, told her something she did not expect. He told her that Kim had not mentioned the board revolt to her. He had not asked for credit for the sacrifice. He had simply handled it. Zara stood at her studio window, looking at the skyline she had once shared with a man who could not see her, and she understood that for the first time he had heard a test and understood it was a test. He had passed not with charm, not with leverage, not with the armor of a CEO, but with silence and consequence. Then came the Tuesday that broke her open. Halmoni Kim flew to New York unannounced. 78 years old, having left Korea only once before for a funeral in Busan, she walked into Zara's Soho studio at 11 in the morning, carrying a cloth bag that smelled of sesame oil and history, and generations of women who had learned to cook as an act of belonging. Zara was with a client, reviewing fabric samples for a boutique hotel. But one look from the old woman cleared the room without a word spoken in English. The client excused himself. The space became theirs. Halmoni placed a worn recipe book on Zara's drafting table, then a jade hairpin. It had belonged to her mother, and her mother before that. In formal, careful Korean, she told Zara that she had once taught her to cook for a bloodline. She had taught her the proportions of doenjang jjigae, the fermented soybean paste stew, so that she could serve her grandson. She had taught her the formal morning greeting so that she could earn a place in a family that had been skeptical of her. But she had been wrong. Zara had not traveled all that way to serve. She had come to belong. And when he made her a guest in her own house, when he took her offerings and called them his own, something had to be corrected. Halmoni told her she was teaching her again, not for him, but for her, so that she would never cook for anyone again unless she wished it, so that she would never learn a language again to earn a place she already deserved, so that she would never shrink herself to fit inside someone else's vision, because her own vision was waiting and had always been waiting. Then she unpinned the jade hairpin from her own silver hair and pressed it into Zara's palm. She walked to her. She held Zara's face the same way she had in that Seoul kitchen years ago, both hands gently, like something precious, and she told her that she was her granddaughter. The blood was his, the marriage was dead, but the visit was for her. She had come to see the woman, not the wife. Zara broke, not the way she had refused to break when she found the text message on his phone while he showered. not the way she had refused to break while labeling 14 freezer containers, while writing reheating instructions for a man who did not know she was leaving while emptying her closet hanger by hanger over 14 months of silent preparation. She broke completely, silently, because someone in that family had finally seen her, not as an asset, not as a bridge between cultures, not as a wife who had learned Korean to impress elders, as a woman who had tried, who had given everything and had the grace to leave without burning the house down. And the old woman held her while she wept in the middle of the studio, the jade pin digging gently into her palm, a blessing that felt like the first honest touch of that entire chapter, a touch that asked for nothing in return. Kim did not know his grandmother was in New York until that evening, and when he learned, he did not go to the studio. He understood, perhaps for the first time in his life, that some healing happens in rooms he is not invited into. Some grace is given in spaces he cannot claim. But 2 days later, the world tried to burn her again. A Korean-American online tabloid published a story with a viciously polite headline. It questioned the timeline of Zara's professional success. It implied that her architectural digest feature, her hotel contracts, her entire reputation had been built on the back of his connections and money. It suggested she left not because he was unfaithful, but because she had secured enough fame to launch herself independently. It took her strength, her discipline, her 14 months of silent preparation, and painted it as cold calculation. It took her exit and reframed it as exploitation. The comments section ignited. Former clients called to express support and concern. Her mother called from Atlanta, furious and frightened, her voice thick with the protective rage of a woman who had raised her daughter to believe that beauty was a language, and that language was power. Zara read the article twice. Then she sat at her kitchen table in Brooklyn Heights, opened the Mitchell & Company social media account, and posted one photograph. It was the closet from the penthouse. The one she had emptied over time, carefully, methodically, with the patience of a woman who had made her decision 14 months before she walked out the door. The hangers were evenly spaced, the shelves were dusted. The light from the master bedroom fell across bare wood in a way that looked like a funeral and a birth at the same time. The caption explained that she had left with nothing but what she built, that everything else was fiction. The post went viral in 6 hours, not because it was angry, because it was undeniable proof. The empty closet was the most eloquent resume a woman had ever written. It said she did not take the marble. She did not take the art he had bought. She did not take the life he had purchased. She took herself, and that was enough. Her client list tripled in 72 hours. The tabloid story was dismantled in real time by women who recognized the architecture of a man trying to paint a wife's exit as greed. They saw the hangers. They saw the precision. They saw the love it took to leave without breaking the glass. Meanwhile, Kim had spent those 6 hours writing a 7-page public confession. Every detail of his infidelity, his failure to see her, his absorption of her labor, his cowardice. He had it prepared to post to his personal account, ready to destroy his own reputation in order to save hers. He brought the draft to her studio at 9 in the evening, standing by the door like a man awaiting sentencing. Zara read it under her desk lamp. She read every word. Then she walked to him and tore the draft in half, then in quarters. She placed the pieces in his hand and told him that his shame was not her shield. She did not need him to fall on a sword so that people would believe she was good. She had been good before she met him. She had been good while he ignored her. She was good now in this studio, with her own name on the door. His confession would make the story about his redemption. It would shift the light back onto him. And she was not a stage for his penance. She was not a backdrop against which he could perform growth. He asked her what he should do. She told him to let her handle it and to get out of her spotlight. He left without argument. and Zara stood alone in her studio, surrounded by the work of her own hands, knowing she had saved herself before. She would save herself again. But the lawsuit arrived on a Friday. It came not from Seo Yan directly, but from a Delaware holding company represented by a law firm known for destroying small businesses through litigation costs rather than legal merit. The claim was absurd: defamation, tortious interference, intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was designed to bleed, to make Zara spend 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars defending herself, to distract her from her work, to paralyze Mitchell and Company with depositions and discovery and the slow financial attrition of a war fought with paper instead of fire. Her attorney, a sharp woman named Renata Voss, explained it over coffee that Saturday. She told Zara that they did not want to win. They wanted her exhausted. They wanted her firm frozen. This was not law. This was financial warfare disguised as justice. Zara listened. She did not flinch, and she did not call Kim. She had told him to get out of her spotlight, and she meant it. But Kim had spent the last 3 weeks doing something he had never done in their marriage. He had been listening to her silence, not her words, the spaces between them, the things she did not ask for, the help she refused to request. He knew, the way a man knows when he has finally learned to read a room instead of owning it, that she would rather lose everything again than ask him to fight a battle she had already told him was not his to fight. So he did not ask permission. He opened the leather folio that had sat in his office safe since he uncovered Seo Yan's espionage months earlier. Inside were wire transfer records, audio transcripts of her meetings with competitor executives, emails where she discussed using her relationship with him to access KM Global's investor pipeline, to share deal structures, to identify contract targets. Proof that the lawsuit was not a defense of a wronged woman. It was the final move of a saboteur who had realized her cover was blown and had decided to burn the ground beneath Zara's feet on her way down. He hired his own legal team, not KM Global's attorneys, his own. He filed a countersuit on behalf of the company's shareholders, exposing Seo Yan's corporate theft in a public filing that could not be ignored, could not be spun, could not be buried. The lawsuit collapsed in 11 days. Her attorneys withdrew. The Delaware holding company dissolved into the anonymous mist from which it had come. What remained of Seo Yan's reputation was incinerated by the very spotlight she had tried to turn on Zara. On the 11th day at 8 in the evening, Kim stood outside Zara's studio again. Same black turtleneck. No leather folio this time. No proof to offer. Just empty hands and the residue of a mess he had finally cleaned. Zara opened the door. She told him she had not asked for a night. He replied that he knew. He had not brought a sword. He had brought a broom. She should not have to sweep up his dirt anymore. Zara looked at his empty hands. She thought about the 14 labeled containers in the freezer of the penthouse, the 3-inch binder on his desk, the way he had once stood in her light and called it his own. She thought about the broom, a tool for cleaning up messes, not a weapon, not a grand gesture, not a gift wrapped in expectation, just a man saying he had made the mess and she should not have to clean it. She stepped aside, just enough to let the hallway light fall across the studio floor. Not an invitation, not an embrace, but not a closed door. He did not enter. He stood in the threshold and asked if she needed anything swept out of her way. He would do it from the hall. He would wait there. He would not cross the line she had drawn. Zara looked at him for a long time. Then she closed the door, but she did not lock it. 2 weeks later, an email arrived. No text, no call. A proper email, brief and direct, written in the formal cadence of a man who had learned that intimacy must be rebuilt with the same patience as architecture. He explained that there was a brownstone in Fort Greene, 2 blocks from her apartment. He had not decorated it. He had not hired a designer to make it impressive. It was empty except for a kitchen table and a single chair. He had bought it because he wanted to be near her light without demanding entry into her space. If she ever wanted to sit somewhere that was not her studio, not his penthouse, not a cafe where they negotiated their past like diplomats, the key was waiting at a local bookstore under her name. He would never ask if she picked it up. He would never knock on that door unless she gave him the address herself. He would not mention it again. Zara read it at her kitchen table. Twice. She did not reply. The next afternoon, she walked past the bookstore. She did not go in. The day after, she walked past again, carrying groceries, her breath visible in the March air. On the fourth morning, she entered. She asked the bookseller, an older woman with kind eyes who seemed to understand something about waiting, for the envelope. The woman handed her a thick cream envelope with her name written in his handwriting. Inside, a single brass key, heavy and unmarked. Zara took it home. She placed it on her kitchen counter. She left it there for 3 days, a foreign object in a space that had become entirely hers. She looked at it while making coffee in her flea market mug. She looked at it while answering emails from clients who now sought her out because they had seen the empty closet and recognized its architecture. She looked at it while sitting in the morning light that had become her private religion, the modest, honest light that asked nothing of her. On the fourth day, she picked up her leather satchel, the one she carried to client meetings and gallery openings and the life she was building piece by piece, and she dropped the key inside. Not a yes, not a promise, not a decision, just a refusal to say no forever. Just a woman who had learned that grace is not the absence of boundaries, but the generosity of leaving a door unlatched. 6 months later, spring had come to New York with absurd force. Blossoms crowded the branches in Brooklyn Heights until the streets looked like they had been painted by her mother, Diane, who had always believed that beauty was not a luxury, but a language. The light in Zara's apartment had shifted from the pale gold of winter to a green-tinged gold that felt like permission, like growth. Mitchell & Co. was no longer a Soho studio. It was a firm with 17 employees, a waiting list stretching into the following spring, and a new satellite office opening in Seoul. Not because of him, because a luxury hotel group in Seoul had seen photographs of the Harlem townhouse she had completed, the space woven from West African and Korean traditions, and had requested her specifically. Because her work spoke a language that crossed oceans without translation. She had built something that needed no marriage, no billionaire, no headline to validate it. It simply existed, and it was excellent. She arrived at JFK Terminal 7 at 6:30 a.m., Gate 14. She was wearing a camel coat she had bought with her own money, a burnt orange silk scarf that reminded her of Georgia Clay, and the jade hairpin holding back the left side of her hair, the one Halmoni had pressed into her palm in the studio. As she reached for her boarding pass on her phone, a shadow fell across the polished floor. She looked up. Kim Jwan stood there. No driver, no security detail forming a perimeter. A single carry-on bag scuffed at the corners, the kind of bag a man buys when he stops pretending his life is curated and starts carrying his own weight. A navy sweater she did not recognize. He looked younger than he had in years, or perhaps he simply looked unguarded, stripped of the easy confidence that had once made entire rooms rearrange themselves around him. He smiled. It was a terrible smile. Sheepish, terrified. He claimed he did not know she would be there. It was a clumsy, transparent lie, the kind of lie told by a man who has spent 6 months learning honesty, but has not yet learned how to be honest about wanting to be near someone. Zara almost smiled. She asked if he was flying business class. He told her he was in economy plus. He had stepped down from the American division 3 months prior. He was consulting for the Seoul office now. Less money, less power, less everything, really. She asked him why. He said he had never been very good at the everything part, and he was trying to learn how to be good at the one thing that mattered. The gate attendant called for boarding. First class, then business, then economy. Zara looked at her pass. Row 4, business class, window seat. She looked at his pass, visible in his hand. Row 12, aisle. She walked toward the jet bridge. He walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside. Two people who had once shared a last name, a penthouse, and a life built on one person's invisibility, now walking through an airport like any two people in the world. Two humans carrying separate boarding passes toward the same city that held their best and worst memories. At the entrance to the jet bridge, she stopped. He stopped. She looked at the long, fluorescent corridor ahead, the promise of a city across the ocean where they had once lived together, where she had learned his grandmother's language before anyone asked her to, where she had cooked stew in a kitchen that did not belong to her, earning a place she should have already owned, where she had been a guest in her own marriage. She observed that row 12 was far from row 4. He said he knew. Then Zara Mitchell, the woman who had walked out of the most beautiful penthouse in Manhattan with nothing but her own certainty and a coat on her shoulders, turned and looked at him. Full eye contact. The kind of look she used to give investors when she wanted them to know she saw through their performance to the fear underneath. But this time, she was not looking for fear. She was looking for truth. She saw it. He was shaking. Not from the cold of the terminal, from the genuine, unearned, terrifying vulnerability of a man who had lost everything he thought was his by right. The title, the corner office, the American division, the performance of power, and was now standing in an airport with an economy class ticket, hoping that being small might finally make him visible. She turned back to the jet bridge. She walked. He followed. Not close, not touching, but following. And somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, 14 hours later, Zara looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about the brownstone key in her bag, about the jade pin in her hair, about the 14 freezer containers and the 3-inch binder, and the river in Brooklyn, where she had told him she would not go back to being invisible inside someone else's life. She thought about the fact that she was flying to Seoul to open an office with her own name on the door, and that the man in row 12 was flying to the same city not to claim her, not to win her back, not to stage a reunion in the place where he had proposed, but simply to be in the same orbit, on her terms, without leverage, without performance, without the armor of a billionaire. She thought about grace, how it was not forgiveness, it was not forgetting, it was not even trust. It was the radical, dangerous decision to let someone exist near you again, not because you need them, not because you are incomplete without them, but because you have finally become so complete that you can afford to be generous, that you can leave a door unlatched without fear of who might walk through. The plane flew on. The clouds broke. The sun hit the wing at an angle that turned the metal gold, a light that belonged to no one and everyone at once. And two people who had once been married sat in different rows, flying toward a city that held their best and worst memories, not as husband and wife, not as lovers, not even as friends, but as two people who had finally stopped lying. Now I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with yourself. Have you ever rebuilt something so carefully, so quietly, so completely, that when someone from your past tried to help, you were not sure if accepting it would heal you or undo you? Have you ever held a key on your kitchen counter for 3 days, not knowing if picking it up meant you were softening, or if it simply meant you were finally strong enough to choose? Because that is where Zara Mitchell lives now. Not in a marriage, not in a breakup, but in the space between surviving and trusting again. And that space is sacred, and it is terrifying, and it is hers. If this story found you today, if you felt that jet bridge moment somewhere in your chest, drop a comment below. Write the word complete if you are rebuilding yourself piece by piece. Write orbit if you have learned to let someone exist near you without letting them consume your gravity. If you haven't watched the part 1, the link is in the description. Like this video if you believe that the strongest thing a woman can do is not walk away loudly, but return to herself so fully that every choice she makes after that is made from wholeness, not need. And if you are not subscribed, do it now. Because part 3 takes us to Seoul, to Halmoni's kitchen, where a stew simmers that holds 6 years of unsaid words, to a dinner where Mrs. Kim finally speaks the truths she has been holding back, and to a rooftop in Gangnam, where Zara Mitchell has to decide, once and for all, if love can be rebuilt from nothing but truth, or if some things are meant to stand alone. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.